Good evening, viewers. Prepare yourselves for a story that defies comprehension, a story that begins not with a crime discovered, but with a crime announced. Imagine a man meticulously documenting the most heinous acts imaginable. He writes it all down, seals it in an envelope, and mails it directly to the police. He doesn't just confess, he taunts them, dares them to find him and the evidence he's left behind. That man was Javed Iqbal, and the stage for this horror was Lahore, Pakistan, a city rich with culture, history, and millions of untold stories. This would become its most infamous. The dates are critical to understanding the silence that preceded the storm. Throughout 1998 and into 1999, boys began disappearing from the streets. One by one, they vanished. Initially, these were treated as isolated incidents, the tragic but common narrative of runaways swallowed by a sprawling city. There was no perceived pattern, no single predator on the radar. Then, in November 1999, letters landed on police desks and at the office of a major newspaper. Inside was a confession of unimaginable scale: the murder of 100 boys. The letter was chillingly detailed. He described how they were lured from the streets with promises of food or shelter, how they were killed, and how their bodies were dissolved in vats of acid, erasing them from existence. To prove his claims, he included photographs of his victims, a diary detailing their names, and a map to the house in a quiet suburb where 2 drums of acid and the partially dissolved remains of his last victims waited. In December 1999, the confession ignited a manhunt that electrified the nation. Public fear turned to outrage. Police raided his known addresses, but he slipped through their grasp each time, becoming a phantom. Then, after a month on the run, he did the unthinkable again. He walked into the same newspaper office that received his letter and surrendered himself, not to the police, but to the press. Witnesses described him as utterly calm, precise. He behaved as if this were a simple bookkeeping errand, not the final act in a spree of terror. In early 2000, the trial began, and it gripped the country. The courtroom was a pressure cooker of grief and anger. The evidence provided by Iqbal himself was chilling and irrefutable. The pattern that emerged was disturbingly methodical. His victims were all the same type: runaways, street children, boys living on the margins of society, the most invisible among us. Those whose absence might not be immediately noticed. The judge, reflecting a nation's horror, delivered a verdict that echoed the crime itself. It was a death sentence, but one designed to mirror his claimed method. He was to be executed in front of the victim's parents. By strangling, his body cut into 100 pieces, one for each victim, and then dissolved in acid. This sentence was more than legal punishment. It was a primal scream of rage and grief from a nation left stunned and broken-hearted. But the story didn't end with a public execution. The law would never be carried out. In October 2001, before the sentence could be enacted, Javed Iqbal, along with a fellow inmate, was found dead in his cell. The official cause was suicide. But for a public that had craved a specific, symbolic form of justice, this quiet, ambiguous end felt like stolen justice. There would be no final answers from him, no ultimate accounting for his motives, just a void. So, what do we do with a tale like this, one that ends not with a bang, but with a whisper? Here's my verdict. First, we must remember the names we don't know. The 100 children whose lives were stolen, whose futures were dissolved in acid. Their memory demands more than horror. It demands that we build systems that actively protect the vulnerable, not just systems that punish the monstrous after the fact. And we must never mistake a confession for closure. The why died with him in that cell, leaving only questions. Evil often introduces itself politely. It doesn't always lurk in the shadows, sometimes it lives next door. It is our collective duty to notice the missing, the lonely, the scared, long before a letter ever arrives. If this case is new to you, let it not be just another ghost story to be consumed and forgotten. Let it be a permanent nudge, a reminder to look out for the overlooked. Because the first line of defense in any community is us, seeing, asking, and acting before the silence becomes deafening.